You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's ministries. You'll never be the same.
Hello, this is Pastor Nick Hood, and today we'll be talking about grief. Death is something we all have to live with. If you are a human being, you become familiar with death. And we'll be back in just a few moments with Dr. Crystal Woods, a psychologist, talking about positive ways of dealing with death.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Crystal Woods, who's a local and noted psychologist. And I asked her to come and stop by here today to help me think through grief and the grieving process. I am a Christian minister, and in the Christian faith, part of what separates Christianity from every other religion is we believe in the resurrection of the dead. And we get that through our reading of the Bible, the resurrection of Jesus on Easter Sunday. And but even so, with that, there are a lot of people who have a very difficult time with grief. And so, Dr. Woods, I want to thank you for being here today. And, we've just come through Easter. Easter is a high point of the Christian year. But part of what makes Easter a high point is the celebration that Jesus rose from the grave. And in your practice as a psychologist, what's your experience in trying to help people to deal with death?
Excellent question. So clearly it comes up a lot in my work. Death is a part of life, and so it is definitely one of the things that can greatly impact people's mood, and it is normal and natural to feel sad and down after experiencing the loss of someone close to you, of a loved one. Sometimes, though, people may find themselves kind of drowning in it, maybe unable to take care of other responsibilities, and that's usually when, I would meet them. But as I think about grief, there have been a number of stages of grief that have been proposed, and whether that's denial, anger, acceptance. So at this point, we don't necessarily think that every person goes through these certain stages of grief. But what I think is also interesting are kind of the tasks that someone has to go through in order to really process grief. So grief is one of those things you can't really go around, you can kind of only go through. So if we're thinking about what are the tasks that a person would need to go through in order to process grief in a healthy way, one is accepting the loss. And so that is accepting the reality that this person is no longer in your life. And that may be tough or hard. It does leave a vacuum there. So accepting they are no longer in your life. The next kind of step is experiencing the feelings associated with their absence. So it is normal and natural for there to be negative emotions associated with that loss. And so allowing yourself to feel those feelings, because again, if we push them away, the idea is that over time we'll find ourselves not having gone through the actual grief process. So then we'll have to repeat it for ourselves later on in life. And so we want to make sure that we're actually experiencing the feelings, if that comes with tears, if that comes with, needing to stay in bed longer than usual, then allowing yourself that time, allowing yourself to feel those feelings. The other task that's important with grief is converting kind of that idea of the presence of this person to one of like their actual virtual presence to one of memory. And so reconnecting with some of those memories you have of the loved one, thinking about, so ideally we'd want to get to a place where not only are you thinking of the sadness that you experience because they're no longer there, but you're also able to maybe smile to yourself in some moments, kind of thinking about a happy memory that the two of you shared, or a way that person made you smile. And the fourth task is being able to try to fill that void. Again, that person cannot be replaced, but what are the new relationships that you can build to help, broaden your social circle? Or what are the relationships you already have that you can reinvest in, that you can double down on in order to fill the, make some attempts to fill the void that person, truly left in your life.
Mm-hmm. So, should a person feel guilty if they're actually something about the death of someone makes them feel good? Not in terms of good riddance, but just the memories, that when we've had good memories, does that mean that a person is not grieving as effectively as they should?
I think that can definitely be a part of healthy grieving. So you could be, you could have that smile on your face because you're remembering a happy memory between you and the person. And sometimes this can happen with the holidays. So the holidays can be really hard for people when they have lost a loved one, sometimes even for years afterwards. And there are many things that can come up as far as grief in the holidays, but one of them is, as you mentioned, maybe even feeling guilty for enjoying themselves or enjoying time spent with other family members or friends during that time when maybe that lost loved one used to be a huge part of it. One of the ways this comes up with holidays, like let's say, the lost loved one, your grandmother, that's where Easter dinner always was. And so part of, trying to fill that void in some way, no one's gonna make grandma's mac and cheese, but can you host it this year? Like what new traditions can you develop with the family that are all experiencing that loss?
Interesting you should mention that. My wife, for the last several years, tries to make a turkey stuffing that was similar to, I think, what her grandmother made. And I think it was her grandmother may have also, one of those stuffing she made was an oyster dressing. And it's kind of unusual. And, then her mother and her sister, along with her, try to ask themselves, well, is this quite like grandma's? One of the happy memories I have, and maybe I'm still grieving, my dad died about 5, 6, 7 years ago, but we have a big black and white photo of him in the lobby of our church. And it must be 5 or 6 feet by 3 or 4 feet. And it's right on the wall. It's a big headshot of my dad. And when I walk by him, I look and I kind of smile to myself and I say, "How am I doing, big guy?" How am I doing now? And I chuckle. I chuckle at that. But what about filling the void? Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do we fill the void of a good relationship?
And so I definitely want to touch on kind of how you use that portrait of your father. And you were like, oh, I don't know if I'm still grieving. I try not to mark it in good or bad, right or wrong. I mark it more in, does it serve you? It sounds like it does. It sounds like it's a reminder that he's looking out for you, that it's a reminder of the model that he set, and kind of a check-in for yourself, like, okay, am I following the path? Am I following the path that he wanted for me, that we wanted for us? And that it sounds like it's something that really serves you. It also reminds me of a Harry Potter reference in that all throughout Hogwarts, there are portraits of famous witches and wizards or other headmasters, and they carry some essence of the person in the portrait, and they can move. They don't speak, but they can motion, they can even nod approval or disapproval. And so that is actually what that reminds me of, is a way of moving your relationship with him, of one of presence, of his physical presence, to one of memory. The idea that he's still living on, in a huge way in your memory.
Well, I know you are a Christian, and in full disclosure, I'm the pastor to Dr. Woods, Olier, and at the Plymouth United Church of Christ, located in the heart of Detroit, the very tip-top of the medical center area of Detroit. But, from a Christian perspective, we believe in the resurrection of the dead. That's the core of the Christian faith. And from a psychological standpoint, would modern psychology view this concept of resurrection from the dead as healthy, realistic, or unrealistic? What does that ever pop up as a psychological dialogue?
That does come up. So I definitely see clients who have Christianity as their background, or who do not, or who have other faiths as their background. And again, when we're thinking of healthy and unhealthy, it's really about, does this serve you? And so there is a very real way that the idea that you are being protected by a loving heavenly being that just loved you so much that he sent his only begotten son down to earth to die, and then to show you that there is hope for your future, after 3 days rose him from the grave. That is hope. That gives hope. That gives the idea that even if things are really tough right now, my reward can be in heaven. That gives the idea that even if there are ways I feel unloved, there's someone who loves me enough to sacrifice for me, and that he can make magic happen. And so that's a pretty good father to have.
Yes.
There are a number of ways where it can serve you really well. And that's how I determine health, non-health. Is this helping you? And I think for a lot of people it does.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Woods, this is very helpful. We're going to take a break, and then when we come back, I'm going to share some of the things that I do personally to handle my own grief. So thanks a lot for watching us. We're going to just take a break. One of the things that is so exciting about this new ministry to me is that already we're getting people from around the country who are calling every week. Somebody calls in. We just had a prophetess from New York to call. I've got people that I talk to in Southern California, Northern California, who are watching this program, Texas, Alabama, and yes, right here in Detroit. But we need your support, and I'd like you to consider supporting this ministry. You can write a check to Nicholas Hood III Ministry, or Nick Hood Ministries, at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201. And if you do that, I will provide you with a complimentary copy of my first book. It's called The Test, the Strength, the Endurance, and the Way Out. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that, but it's a book of photographs. Dr. Woods, I'm a closet photographer.
Look at that.
Kind of like your father.
Yes.
I think your father
I
used
don't know
to
if
run
he was
around
in the
with a camera.
closet. He was very visible with his.
He was out there. But I like taking photos, and they help me to remember a moment. And then I juxtapose the photos with a prayer. And I'm working on, a new version of that. But we'll be back in just a few moments, and we're going to talk a little bit more about effective ways of dealing with grief. Stay tuned.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, the Strength, the Endurance, and the Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Thanks for sticking with us. We've been talking about grief, and I want to share something. I have Dr. Crystal Woods with me today, Dr. Crystal Woods Olier. And Dr. Woods, I want to be confessional. This is my moment with a psychologist. And for free. And I want you to help me know if I'm being healthy or not.
Okay.
I had a father to die about 5-6 years ago, and he and I were very close. We, he raised me, but when I came out of divinity school, he hired me. And I worked for him for 8 years as his assistant minister. And then I became the minister, but even after I became the minister, he and I talked a lot. We would talk sometimes, I might talk with him 2 to 5 times a day. In the car, I'd call him up or he would call me. For years, I would talk to him at 5 or 6 in the morning. And, we'd talk about all kinds of things that happened in the church, things that were happening in the city and politics and so forth. Then my dad dies, but I had a brother who you knew, Steve, and Steve kind of filled that void that I had with my dad. And Steve and I got to the point where we might talk. I'm 11 years older than Steve was. We would talk 2 to 5 times a day. And then Steve dies. And I told my wife, and I probably shouldn't have told her that, because I told her, I said, I'm lonely. She said, well, you have me. I said, well, yeah, I have you. I said, but with my father, then my brother, there are things that I talk with them about that, I said, my wife is a judge. So she's working all day long. I tease her, I say she's hanging people all day long. And I said, she doesn't have time for me to call her up until 5:30. I stay in my lane. But I'm getting to my resolution of my grief. And so just yesterday, I'm driving down the street from, a 30-minute ride to get back to where I was going. And I felt that feeling of loneliness. I said, if my dad were here, I'd call him. If my brother were here, I'd call him. And he's not around, neither of them around. So I have a handful of guys in the church who, these are church members, but they're younger than I am. And sometimes your husband is one of them. But there too, he's on military maneuvers.
There is that as well. Mm-hmm.
But I called a guy who I think he's in his early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. And I just started talking to him. And that guy talked my ear off for 30 minutes, till I could get to my destination. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I'm asking you is that healthy, or am I in some kind of denial? Or, I mean, what's your quick thought of that? I mean, is that for me to try to find some people who are younger, and even though they're not exactly, the conversations I have with them are not exactly like what I'd have with my brother or my father. What do you think about that?
Well, I think what you're describing, it makes sense that was tough. So losing a parent is tough. Losing a sibling is tough as well. And, may even feel like more of a surprise than losing a parent. It sounds like through each of those experiences, you have, made a pivot, and that you've said, okay, I know that this is a void. I know this is something that I need, for my own emotional well-being as I'm, serving and caring for so many other people. This is kind of one of the things I need for me. And so you did a successful job of finding that with your brother. And now you are doing a successful job maybe of even diversifying a bit. So it may be a tall order to be the sole person that you contact the 2 to 5 times a day. That might, require a different either type of relationship or work-life balance for them. But that you are kind of spreading that out among, other men that you really respect and that you enjoy interacting with. I think that makes all the sense in the world. And it sounds like, because again, if we're talking about healthy, unhealthy, the pivot point is it serving you? Are you being fed by this? Are you being, refreshed by this? That's the kind of question to ask yourself if you're trying to figure out, is this a behavior I should continue or not? And if we're thinking about, broadening what are other options, I wonder what it would be like, especially if there's a special certain thing on your mind, for you to either think to yourself while you're in the car or even talk out aloud, what would a conversation with my dad be like about this? What would my dad say about this? What would Steve say about this? Because that is that piece of converting their physical presence to memory. You know your dad. You grew up with him. You worked underneath him. You spoke to him 2 to 5 times a day, for hours, for years. There is a working version of your dad in your brain, inside of you. And so probably anything that comes up, if you really thought about it, you know exactly what your dad would say about that. And you know exactly what Steve would say about that. So another option that, that you have while you're in that car, and maybe if, my husband Adam, or if one of the other men in the church doesn't pick up, to kind of have that conversation with your lost loved one.
And to clarify things, in particularly for our audience, when I say that I used to talk to my dad and my brother 2 to 5 times a day, so many of those conversations were not long. It might be, if I'm going to a board meeting, I pick up the phone, I say, Dad or brother, I'm on my way to this board or that board, or I'm going to this meeting or that meeting. And then when I'd leave the meeting, en route to the next meeting or appointment, I'd call them again. I'd say, okay, I just finished this meeting. I'm going to the next one. And very often, and now I'm going to be disclosive, I'm an African American. And in many of the meetings, these meetings that I participate in, they're predominantly white. There are very few African Americans. The question my father would ask me? When I'd leave the meeting with predominantly white people, he said, did you leave them with something to remember? You think about that. And then he'd say, and what was it? So, back to where we started. In John 21, Peter and the disciples, the 10 surviving disciples along with him, they go to the Galilee where Jesus told them to go, and they're there waiting for Jesus, and they go fishing. That's what they do. They go fishing in the night. And I think, from my non-degreed psychological perspective, they were working out their grief because they were fishers. They were fishermen before they met Jesus. Any quick closing thoughts on this?
I think one of the interesting parts about that is that fishing was also an activity that they often did with Jesus. And so as they are working through their grief, they're surrounding themselves with other people who have similar memories of the deceased of Jesus and engaging in an activity that they all did together. And had some amazing experiences, saw miracles happen out there on that boat, out there in those waters. And how, fitting is it for them to spend that time there reflecting on and sharing in this communal grief.
Dr. Woods, we've got to stop here. I keep calling you Woods. You're a married woman now, Dr. Crystal Woods Ollier. And what's the name of your healthcare organization?
Yes, so I am the director of an outpatient behavioral health clinic. It's a part of Lifestance Health. My particular clinic is in Southfield, Michigan, and we provide outpatient therapy and psychiatric medication treatment for people dealing with a host of different mental health issues. I also see patients there as well. It is the passion of my life. It is what I believe I was, placed on this earth to do. And so if anyone is looking for help, you can definitely Google Lifestance Health in your area. It's actually a nationwide company.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with me. And Dr. Woods is going to join me for the next 4 weeks. And I want to thank you for watching this program today. Pray for me. Pray for this ministry. And remember, I need your support. If you've been touched by what we've talked about today about grieving, and everybody I know grieves at some point. If you've been touched, if you think that this is a meaningful ministry, I invite you to support us financially by writing a check to Nicholas Hood III Ministries at the address below. God bless, God keep you, and remember, I'm praying for you.
Thank you for watching today's program. We hope you've been blessed in a powerful way. Just knowing you took the time to watch today's broadcast is a great encouragement to Pastor Nick Hood. If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, we ask that you mail a tax-free donation to Nicholas Hood Ministries at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.